Hey everyone, Dr. Green here. Today we're talking about Chapter 2 in your text, gathering requirements. How do we get requirements from our customer? Or a better description yet, knowing what the customer wants. So important, yet so hard to do. You've heard me say in previous videos, one of the jobs of a software engineer is not just building software, it's not just gathering requirements. It's leading the user through a process of understanding what they want and what they actually need. This is a really big thing to talk about. So you're talking about all these kind of things, and it can be a really challenging thing, but you gain a lot of expertise just from doing it. In the Agile methodology, the fundamental way we do this is through user stories. We'll talk about this in a second in a little more depth. A user story has a title, which encapsulates the requirement, and it has this three segments. As a user or who, I want an action or what, so that there's a purpose or why. So as a general user, I want to log in so that I can view my account. As an administrator, I want to log in so that I have access to everything. As a admin, I want to be able to delete users so that I can remove them from the system once they're no longer needed. Okay? This is the kind of thing we're looking at this point. These are just some off the cuff, real quick things to think about, but this is really it. In fact, I consult in my spare time, and one of the things I do when I'm actually building software is I introduce this pattern to my clients. I say, hey, I want you to think about your software in terms of roles. Who will use it? Why will they use it? And what are they trying to accomplish? And what I want you to do is write down a series of sentences for me, all in the same form. And I want them to say, as a role, I want to do something. That lets my clients come back with as a user, as a general user, as an administrator, as a student, as a teacher, as a lawyer, so on and so forth, right? And it helps them think about who will actually be using their software, why they'll be using it, and how they'll be working through it. Now, I will tell you and give you this caveat, user stories are not the end-all be-all. You will see some folks that will change these to get some actual technical functional requirements, right? As the database, I want to perform a query in under 60 seconds so that my performance metrics are good, right? Something like that. I don't buy that all the time. I think you're trying to push things together. What I really prefer is to save user stories where there's a well-defined user role that's customer-facing and customer-centric, and then just write those other technical requirements either as details, subtasks inside a user story, or as separate requirements that are not formed like a user story. Right? As I said before, agile should not be hard and fast. You are agile, right? You don't do agile, you are agile. So we want to use these user stories in the best way possible to accomplish our goals. And that's what you're going to be really focusing on this week. You're going to read a lot more about getting these user stories in the chapter, but this is the high level overview. Always remember, these things should describe one thing. Use language the customer understands, and be short. Now, if we were in a classroom, I would have you working through these and guessing them, and I would come around the class and I would critique you every time you used a technical term like database or SQL or PHP or C# or C++. When you write these, when you talk with your client, don't ever use technical language. If your customer doesn't understand these user stories, they should not be written. Okay? They should not be long. They should not use technical terms, and they shouldn't mention specific technologies, right? Just like I said, always keep these things in mind. So a little deeper dive, let's flesh this out. As a type of user, I want to perform some task so that I can achieve a goal or benefit. I think that's really straightforward. It seems simple. It seems straightforward. It's not as simple or straightforward as you think. Once you start writing these, you will find that it actually takes a lot of time and a lot of argument between team members to figure out what this means. How do you know when you've done this though? Like if I write a user story, how do I know when I'm done implementing it? Well, you use an acceptance test. So if we were doing this on paper, on a note card, on the front would say, as a user, I want to do something so that I can achieve some benefit. On the back, we would list this given, when, then. Okay, so remember this pattern, given, when, then. This is how you know you're done. This is called an acceptance test. Okay, so here's an example. As a customer, I want to withdraw cash from an ATM so I don't have to wait in line at the bank. That's a legit user story. My acceptance test might be, given that the account is creditworthy and the card is valid and the dispenser contains cash, when the customer requests cash, then I can ensure the account is debited, ensure the cash is dispensed, and ensure the card is returned. Or given that the account is overdrawn and the card is valid when the customer requests cash, then we ensure the rejection message is displayed and ensure cash is not dispensed. You can easily do this on a user story for anything else too, right? As a user, I want to log in to view my account. Given that the email address and password are valid and matching, when the user presses the login button, then the account summary page is displayed. Given that the email address or password is incorrect, when the user presses the login button, then a failed login attempt message is displayed. Okay? We can write these, and they're really important because they're the only way you actually have an empirical method of measuring if you are done. Okay? So we have user stories. We have a format for a user story. We have basic acceptance testing, given, when, then, and you can have as many acceptance tests as you want on on any user story. We'll also find estimates or priorities on user stories. Many people use different ways of estimating. In your book, and in a lot of ways, they use days: a half day, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, all the way up to 100. You should never see big estimates here. Anything more than 5 is out of control, and you need to shorten and cut up that user story. Others will use Fibonacci story points, right? Where they start at 0 and they get higher and higher. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89. So the farther you get up this, the harder it is. The good thing about this is when you're assigning a low number of points, you know that the stories are relatively easy and relatively similar, and they increase in difficulty exponentially. You may not know this, but the human mind naturally thinks in exponents. You actually, by nature, think exponentially. So a Fibonacci sequence is actually much easier to understand than using days. Other folks will use straight story points: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. I say use whatever creates nice separation for you. I prefer using priorities over estimates of days. I think daily estimates are really hard to nail down. Estimating is generally bad for people, right? When I was working in industry, I would make an estimate as a developer. My supervisor would multiply that by 4, and then his boss would multiply it by 4 again just to make sure we didn't screw it up. So these are really, really hard to get, and they really come with experience. But when you estimate a user story, the big thing is make sure your team agrees on the estimate or the priority or the weight. Okay? Once you have that done, your whole project estimate is just the sum of the estimates for your user stories. And that's how we start to divide things into iterations and into schedules very easily and straightforward. We can now add up things and say, well, I have 5 days to do this. I can pick out 5 days of work. Or I have 5 days, and I know in that 5 days my team can normally accomplish 20 story points. Well, let's pick out the most important 20 story points. Okay? So this is really good. Do remember, a big user story estimate is a bad user story estimate. Anything greater than 15 days is way too much. I would argue that anything greater than 5 days is way too much. If you ever find yourself writing user stories that use the words and or, always remember that they probably should be broken up into smaller chunks. Okay? Now, this was just a high-level overview of your chapter. There are exercises to do in there. You should do all the pencil to paper exercises and, the brain things and stuff like that. We'll have a discussion on Canvas as well. But I want you to go through and read that because there's other important things about talking to your client. Blue skying, always asking questions, always looping your client in and having them involved in this process, which you really got to get around. But once you've read that and done the discussion and seen this little video, the thing you're going to find out is you're now going to be working in groups. You're going to be getting in touch and you're going to be writing actual user stories using GitLab. So after this, there'll be a second video. I'm looking forward to having you guys watch that. Hopefully this gave you some good information and a good recap on the chapter, and we will see you soon.